There's two main areas where mental illness evolves, and that's in illness of thought or illness of mood. So illnesses of thought are the processing illnesses where you have something like schizophrenia, which is characterized by positive and negative symptoms. So the positive symptoms are added to a person. They're symptoms like delusions, hallucinations or paranoia, and negative symptoms which are taken away from the person. So their ability for social functioning, some of their advanced cognitive processing, some of their self-care might be changed, and that's the classic thing that some people might notice to identify somebody with a mental illness. Disorders of mood have the classic bipolar illness, which has highs and lows, or just a depressive process where we have quite a common illness is depression, where quite a number of people in the community have depression, and sometimes with anxiety that goes with it. And they're sort of the main illnesses that we see, as well as anxiety as its own disorder. We see personality disorders, which is where as somebody develops and their personality structure develops, they might find that particular facets of their personality evolve to a point that it becomes a disorder. Somebody can overvalue themselves or can be quite black and white or rigid in their processing of how they're interacting with others. Somebody's either really with them or really against them, or different things like that. Psychosis is where somebody's perspective on what's happening isn't either processing correctly or they're misinterpreting the information, and it's characterised as a positive symptom for an illness like schizophrenia. And psychosis can come in many different forms, as in a delusion, which is a firm, fixed, unshakable belief, and that person might believe that there's somebody else. They might believe that people are talking about them, or that are saying things that aren't true, or that various statements of fact are true when they're not, or could be true when there's evidence to the contrary. They might believe that, for say, they have $3 million in the bank when they don't, or that somebody's stolen it, or that somebody might be impersonating them, or that somebody else isn't actually who they seem. Illnesses are quite treatable, and with the range of medication that we use, somebody can have an active episode of their illness, and the term we use is relapse. So they can relapse, have an episode of their illness, but with successful treatment with medication, they can often return to work, or the term we use is recovery, which is the person makes the most out of the circumstance that they're in and is able to return to a particular level of functioning that with that medication they can function in society and can perhaps work or interact with others or lead a meaningful life. Mood disorders can be quite interesting because we've often encountered clients that have been through the legal system when they've been elevated, and that's manic, and so that they think they have overvalued ideas, and the term we use is too much behaviour, so that they might believe that they're entitled to particular benefits or money or things that they're actually not, and they have an overvalued belief that they will often seek legal support in meeting these beliefs that they have. And so having a good critical look at the person, if they seem to be having too much behaviour, they're elevated, they're physically overactive, they're speaking very fast, they have many ideas and great business ideas that they think that they can do that on reasonable critical analysis look quite implausible, they usually are. The opposite is true, that when somebody is depressed, they may actually be avoiding dealing with matters that they actually have to. People can get significantly in debt by not attending to their bills or their accounts, or not keeping their affairs in order to the point where it becomes into the legal system for either collection of it or for managing that person's affairs. Stigma is one of the most difficult issues that we deal with within mental health. There's a lot of misrepresentation of mental illness within the media, within movies. There's a lot of unfortunate history within mental health that we're working past. And given that the opinion of most people of mental illness, when it's not something that you can actually see, There's people have the misunderstanding that people with a mental illness are a greater risk of violence when they're usually far more a risk to themselves than to anybody else. And the stigma that's attached to it often discourages people from actually disclosing any of their mental health concerns or of talking about it.
I think it is important for lawyers to be aware of the sort of the wide spectrum of what is mental health and what is mental illness, and how that changes over time. And because, you know, when you're doing, for example, capacity assessments, well, that might be very different on one day versus another day. So people's mental state changes, people's circumstances change. It's about understanding the sort of nature of the condition and what it means to that person. Some days somebody with a very severe mental illness may be actually spot on and very coherent and have full capacity, and another day they may not. And you have to understand that sort of change with time, the change with different treatments, and also the sort of complexities when you have a complex mental illness that's often associated with multiple medical conditions or with multiple neurological disabilities, that you can have questions where what's due to the mental illness, what's due to the disability, what's due to the medical condition, or what's due to the treatment. And those are complex questions, and while the lawyer doesn't need to get involved in the intricacies of those questions, they do need to appreciate that there's lots of very subtle nuances, and those nuances are important for them to appreciate what needs to happen for that patient to improve their care.
What Harry has described as the dynamic nature of capacity, particularly for people with the mental illness, in that it's changeable and fluctuating, and therefore the lawyer's job is each and every time they're with the person is to just check out whether the person's understanding and following the conversation, and also realising the impact of that. So if the person's not as coherent on that particular day as there've been other times, maybe it's not the time to have those conversations, and to rebook for another time and just check in. You know, there might be another time that suits you better. And the other thing to consider is that when person's capacity is fluctuating, if you've got concerns that they don't have capacity today, well then, you know, well, what decisions really have to be made today? So putting things off if they don't have to be made today. So for example, capacity to give instructions or capacity, you know, that might be something that has to be finalised today because we're about to go to the tribunal, or capacity to make financial decisions, that can fluctuate, but it might not be an issue for right here and right now, and can be put off for another day.
The difficulty some people experience with their mental illness concerns is that they're not willing to talk about it to people, or they don't want to disclose perhaps that, let's say, they've had depression or they're having depression ongoing, because they're concerned about what other people will think. And that often just acknowledging that the person, like if you have depression or that you have anxiety, that you're an average member of society. You know, a lot of people actually have those concerns, and that it's manageable, and many people are living with it and working and living completely fulfilling lives whilst having reasonable treatment for it at the time. People with mental illness aren't stupid. They're an average member of society that has, for that point in time, some functional differences in how their brain is working that is treatable, and often is very successfully treated to keep that person functioning quite well. And in fact, in my career working in mental health, I've met some exceptionally bright and exceptionally smart people that, even while they have been unwell, are still able to be really articulate and manage their affairs well whilst dealing with whatever other things that's happening. For a mental health client, often the illness and their medication and the health perspective is only but a minor part of their life. Any of the other complicating events, accommodation, dealing with Centrelink, dealing with a mental health review tribunal, dealing with legal services, dealing with the police, dealing with Department of Housing, dealing with insurance companies, any of the frameworks that which all of us have to deal with. But if you're stressed, having difficulty functioning as well as you normally would, it's going to be extremely difficult to go through with that. And so if all of the organisations that are involved are fairly open about involving themselves with other parts of that organisation, with the whole point of it being the best outcome for the client, for what the client wants out of it, that's going to get the best outcome for that person, and that's going to give them the most meaningful life.